Sarah Mitchell counted the bills twice, spreading them across the chipped formica counter of her studio apartment like they might multiply if arranged differently. $47 in tips from an 8-hour shift at Morrison's Diner. Thursday was never good for tips. The lunch crowd tipped better, but she'd been stuck on the dinner rotation for 3 weeks straight because Marcus had seniority and always claimed the profitable shifts. She divided the money into mental categories: 30 for groceries, which left 17. Emma's daycare was due tomorrow, $600. The late fee kicked in after 5 days, another 75. Her checking account had $218, which meant she was $382 short even before the late fee. The rent notice taped to her door that morning had been pink. Final warning, she is until eviction proceedings. $750 plus $150 late fee, $900 total. The math didn't work. It never worked. Emma slept in the pull-out bed they shared, her 8-year-old body curled around the stuffed rabbit Sarah's grandmother had sent for her 6th birthday. The rabbit's ear was torn, stitched back together with dental floss because Sarah couldn't afford proper thread. Emma's winter coat hung on the door hook, the right elbow blown out entirely, exposing the thin polyester lining. $47 wouldn't buy a replacement. The thrift store wanted $30 for used coats in decent condition. Sarah's phone buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. She almost declined, probably another collections call about the $3,800 in medical bills from Emma's pneumonia last year, but something made her answer. The voice on the other end was professionally neutral, male, older. Gerald Pritchard, attorney at law. He was calling regarding the estate of Margaret Eleanor Hartwell, Sarah's grandmother, deceased 3 days prior. Peaceful, passing in her sleep. The will reading was scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning at his office in Colorado Springs. Sarah's hand went numb. The phone slipped, and she caught it against her chest. Her grandmother. Dead. The word felt wrong, too final, like a door slamming in a house that had always been open. She hadn't seen Maggie in 2 years, couldn't afford the gas for the 90-minute drive, couldn't afford to take time off work. Phone calls every few weeks, Sarah's voice bright and lying, pretending everything was fine, while Emma coughed in the background and the eviction notices piled up. The last conversation had been 3 weeks ago. Maggie's voice thin over the line, asking if Sarah needed anything. Sarah saying no, everything was good, they were doing great. The lie had tasted like pennies. Gerald Pritchard was still talking. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Did she need directions? Sarah heard herself saying yes, she'd be there, thank you for calling. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone who had their life together enough to receive formal phone calls about estates and wills. After she hung up, Sarah stood in the tiny kitchen area and counted the bills again. $47, a dead grandmother, a will reading. The absurdity of it struck her sideways. She was worried about $17 in grocery money while somewhere in Colorado Springs, a lawyer was sorting through whatever Maggie had left behind. Probably not much. Maggie had lived simply, a retired schoolteacher in a small town, driving the same car for 20 years, mending her own clothes. Whatever the inheritance was, it wouldn't be enough to matter. Maybe a few thousand, maybe just personal effects. Sarah looked at Emma sleeping. Tomorrow she'd have to call in sick to work. Roger, the manager, would be furious. This would be the 3rd time this month. But the alternative was skipping the will reading, and something in Gerald Pritchard's tone suggested that wasn't optional. She called her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who sometimes watched Emma for $20. Mrs. Chen said yes, but only until 2 p.m. because she had a doctor's appointment. Sarah would have to make the drive down and back in 4 hours. Possible, barely, if traffic cooperated. At 6 a.m., Sarah woke Emma and explained they were going on a drive. Emma's face brightened. Any break from routine was an adventure when you were 8. Sarah dressed her in the best clothes they had, jeans without holes and a sweater that almost fit. They stopped at McDonald's for breakfast, splurging $3 on hash browns that Emma split with careful precision, saving half for later like she'd learned to do with everything. The drive to Colorado Springs took 93 minutes. Sarah's 2008 Honda Civic rattled above 60 miles per hour, the check engine light glowing steady like a second sun. The needle on the gas gauge hovered near empty. She'd put in $10 last night, enough for the round trip with maybe a gallon to spare. Gerald Pritchard's office occupied the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown. The kind with brass fixtures and elevator music that probably cost more to maintain than Sarah's annual income. The waiting room had leather chairs that squeaked when Emma shifted, magazines on glass tables, a receptionist with perfect nails who smiled professionally and offered coffee. Sarah accepted water. Her hands shook, holding the plastic cup. The door to the inner office opened. Victoria appeared first. Sarah's sister looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Charcoal suit that fit like it had been tailored. Probably had been tailored. Hermes bag Sarah recognized from a billboard she'd seen in Denver. Hair professionally highlighted, nails manicured, skin that glowed with the kind of health that came from regular sleep and expensive skincare. Victoria was 35, 3 years older, and occupied a completely different economic reality. Corporate lawyer in Boston, making low six figures, married to a surgeon, no kids. They spoke maybe twice a year, usually around holidays, conversations that felt like performance art. Victoria's eyes flicked over Sarah, taking inventory. The worn jacket, the shoes from Payless, Emma's patched coat. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. A slight straightening, like she'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. She didn't ask how Sarah was doing, didn't acknowledge Emma beyond a brief nod, just pulled out her phone and started scrolling, thumbs moving with practiced efficiency. Gerald Pritchard emerged next, 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of thin that came from forgetting to eat rather than intentional diet. He ushered them into his office with apologetic gestures, like he was sorry for whatever was about to happen. The office was all dark wood and law books that probably hadn't been opened in 20 years. Gerald settled behind his desk and opened a folder thick with documents. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the will. Margaret Eleanor Hartwell, deceased April 14th, sound mind and clear instruction. The estate consisted of the main residential property and surrounding land, various personal effects, one vehicle and one additional structure located on the eastern ridge of the property. Gerald's voice took on the formal cadence of legal language. To Victoria Marie Mitchell, the main house and all furnishings therein, the barn and its contents, and 240 acres of surrounding land. Current appraised value, $4.8 million. Victoria's expression didn't change. She'd known, of course she'd known, probably had called the lawyer weeks ago, gotten the information early, prepared accordingly. To Sarah Rose Mitchell, Gerald continued, and his voice softened in a way that made Sarah's stomach drop. The stone tower structure located on the eastern ridge, the half-acre of land immediately surrounding said structure, in all contents therein. Silence filled the room like water. Sarah heard her own heartbeat, loud and wrong. Victoria laughed, sharp, brief, the sound of a door slamming. Her voice came out amused, pitying. The tower, of course, the tower. Sarah had seen the tower exactly twice in her life. Once as a child, when Maggie had driven her out to the eastern edge of the property and pointed at the stone cylinder rising from the hillside. Once as a teenager, when curiosity had driven her to explore, and she'd found nothing but bird droppings and fallen stones. Nobody had been inside in decades. The thing was structurally unsound, dangerous, worthless, except maybe for the stones if someone wanted to haul them away. 4.8 million versus a pile of rocks. The disparity was so absurd, it felt intentional, like Maggie had wanted to make a point about something Sarah couldn't begin to understand. Gerald was pulling out envelopes, 2 of them, handwritten names on the front. He slid one across the desk to Victoria, one to Sarah. Personal letters from the deceased, to be read at your convenience. Victoria picked hers up, glanced at it, tucked it into her Hermes bag without opening it. She pulled out a pen, expensive, probably cost more than Sarah's grocery budget, and started signing documents wherever Gerald indicated. She didn't read them first, just signed, efficient, done. Sarah stared at her envelope. Her name in Maggie's shaky handwriting, the letters uneven but determined. The paper felt too thin, like it might tear if she gripped it wrong. Emma tugged on her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, what's a tower?" Sarah found her voice. "It's like a castle tower, baby. Grandma left it to us." Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt. She looked at Sarah for the first time, really looked, and her expression carried something that might have been sympathy if sympathy came wrapped in condescension. "If you need help clearing out the tower, Let me know. I'm sure there are some stones that could be salvaged. Maybe you could sell them. The offer landed like a slap. Sarah met her sister's eyes and saw nothing there she recognized. They'd grown up in the same house, shared a room until Victoria left for college, and never really came back except for holidays, when she'd complain about the food and the Wi-Fi and how there was nothing to do in town. It's where everyone knew everyone else's business. Sarah's voice came out flat. Thanks, I'll manage. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm sure you will. You always do, don't you? Managing. She said it like it was an insult, like there was something shameful about making things work with what you had instead of always demanding more. Victoria left without saying goodbye to Emma. The door clicked shut behind her with expensive softness. Gerald cleared his throat, apologetic. There are some papers for you to sign as well, Miss Mitchell. Just acknowledgement that you've received the inheritance and understand the terms. Sarah signed where he indicated. Her hands shook, the letters came out jagged. Gerald slid the documents back into his folder. I'm sorry, for what it's worth, I tried to talk to Margaret about this. She was very firm about her decisions. She said you'd understand eventually. Sarah nodded because she didn't trust her voice. She tucked the envelope into her jacket pocket, took Emma's hand, and walked out of that office with her head up and her shoulders back because that's what you did when life handed you rocks and expected you to build something. The drive back took longer. Traffic was heavy, and the Civic's engine made a new sound around Castle Rock, a ticking that suggested something expensive was about to break. Sarah drove with the radio off, Emma beside her eating the saved half of the McDonald's hash brown, carefully breaking it into smaller pieces to make it last. The envelope in Sarah's pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. She wanted to pull over and read it immediately. She wanted to throw it out the window. She wanted to go back in time and visit her grandmother more, call more often, not lie about how fine everything was. They made it back to Denver with the gas gauge on empty and the engine still ticking when Chen met them at the door, apologetic about the time, but she really did have that doctor's appointment. Sarah paid her the $20, which left $27 from yesterday's tips. Emma went to play with the toy cars Sarah had found at Goodwill for $3. Sarah sat on the edge of their pull-out bed and opened the envelope. The letter was written on lined notebook paper, torn from a spiral. Maggie's handwriting wandered across the page, sometimes neat, sometimes sprawling, like she'd written it over multiple sittings. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I imagine you're confused and probably hurt. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not sorry for my choice. Victoria got what Victoria wanted, the house, the land, the appearance of wealth. She's always chased appearances. Even when she was small, she wanted to be seen, admired, envied. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not substance. It's not character. You got the tower. I know it looks like nothing. I know the family probably laughed. Let them laugh. You've always been stronger than they gave you credit for. The tower holds something more valuable than land or buildings, Sarah. But you'll have to trust me enough to look for it. Go there, not just a quick visit. Really go. Bring Emma. Spend time. The answers you need are there, but only if you're willing to see them. I always knew you were the one who would understand, the one who wouldn't waste it, the one who would honor what it means. Trust yourself, my girl. You're braver than you know. All my love, Grandma Maggie. Sarah read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. Her hands were shaking. Emma looked up from her cars. Mama, are you okay? Sarah wiped her eyes. Yeah, baby, I'm okay. The letter made no sense. The tower was a ruin. There was nothing there except stones and bird nests and maybe some historical value if someone cared about 19th century architecture, which nobody did. But Maggie's words carried certainty, like she'd known exactly what she was doing, like every choice had been deliberate. The tower holds something more valuable than land or building things. Sarah thought about calling in sick to work again tomorrow, thought about the rent notice and the daycare bill and the $27 in her wallet, thought about her grandmother spending 60 years in that small town, driving the same car, wearing the same clothes, living simply while Victoria got a $4.8 million estate. Something didn't add up. Maggie had been sharp until the end. Gerald had said so, sound mind and clear instruction. She wouldn't have left Sarah nothing, wouldn't have made her the joke of the family without reason. Go there. Really go. Spend time. Sarah made a decision. The next morning, she called Morrison's diner. Roger answered, his voice already irritated before she said anything. Sarah told him she needed 2 days off. Family emergency. Roger's silence was heavy, disappointed. This was the third time this month, Sarah. I've got other waitresses who want your shifts. You're on thin ice here. Sarah heard herself saying she understood. Thank you. She'd be back Saturday. Her voice was steady even though her heart was hammering. She packed a bag for her and Emma. Clean clothes, toothbrushes, the stuffed rabbit. $40 for gown, enough to get there and back with some to spare. She'd figure out food when they got there. The drive to Colorado Springs felt different in daylight. Emma asked questions the whole way. What does a tower look like? Can we go inside? Is it really ours? Sarah answered what she could, making it sound like an adventure because that's what mothers did. They turned fear into games, uncertainty into possibility. Gerald Pritchard's directions led them east from Colorado Springs, away from the city and into rolling hills that gradually steepened into the foothills of the Rockies. The main road gave way to county roads, then to dirt roads that were really just 2 tire tracks through prairie grass. 23 miles from town, the tower appeared. Sarah pulled over and just stared. The structure rose 35 feet from a rocky hillside, a stone cylinder maybe 18 feet across at the base. The top was open. The wooden cap that had once held the windmill blades was long gone. Stones had fallen from the walls in places, leaving gaps like missing teeth. Weeds grew thick around the foundation. The whole thing tilted slightly, or maybe that was just the hillside, but either way, it looked like one strong wind might bring the whole thing down. Emma's voice was small. It looked scary. Sarah squeezed her hand. Sometimes things that look scary are just old and forgotten. They're not dangerous, just sad. They got out of the car. The wind up here was stronger than down in town, carrying the smell of sage and dry earth. Sarah approached the tower carefully, testing each step. The wooden boards nailed across the doorway were half rotted. She pulled them away easily, the wood crumbling in her hands. Inside, the tower was dim and cool. Her eyes adjusted slowly. The floor was dirt, packed hard over decades, with scattered stones that had fallen from above. The walls curved around them, rough stone held together with ancient mortar. High above, she could see blue sky through the open top. Birds had nested in the upper reaches. Their droppings painted white streaks down the walls. There's nothing here. Emma's whisper echoed slightly off the stones. Sarah walked the perimeter, running her hand along the rough surface. She was looking for something but didn't know what. A hiding place? A safe? Some indication of what Maggie had meant? Her foot hit something that didn't sound like dirt. Sarah stopped, kicked gently at the spot. Instead of the soft thud of packed earth, she heard a hollow sound. Wood. Her heart started pounding. She knelt down, brushing away loose dirt with her hands. Emma joined her, small fingers digging. Beneath about 3 inches of dirt, Sarah's hands found wood. Not just any wood, smooth finished boards. A floor that had been buried. They dug faster. The boards formed a square, maybe 4 feet on each side. At one edge, barely visible beneath the dirt, Sarah found a metal ring. A handle. Mama, what is it? I don't know, baby. Sarah wrapped her fingers around the ring and pulled. The trapdoor was heavy, and the hinges screamed from decades of disuse. But it opened. Beneath it, stone steps descended into darkness. Sarah pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The steps looked solid, carved from the same stone as the tower itself. They led down about 12 feet to what looked like a landing or a room. Cold air drifted up from below, carrying a smell that wasn't quite musty, but wasn't quite fresh either. Something in between. A place that had been sealed but not forgotten. Emma's voice carried equal parts fear and excitement. Are we going down there? Sarah should have said no, should have closed the trap door, covered it back up, called someone. A professional, someone who knew about old structures and what might be hiding in sealed underground rooms. But Maggie's voice was in her head. Go there, really go, spend time. And something deeper than logic pulled her forward. Stay close to me. Sarah started down the steps. They descended slowly, Sarah testing each stone before putting her full weight on it. Emma held onto her jacket, breathing fast. The phone's flashlight bounced shadows around the narrow stairwell, making everything look unstable and shifting. 12 steps down, they reached the bottom. The room was small, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with stone walls and a ceiling just high enough for Sarah to stand upright. But what made her breath catch wasn't the size. Against the far wall stood a metal filing cabinet, old style, gray paint with rust spots blooming across its surface. Next to it sat a wooden crate, sealed with nails that looked ancient. And scattered across the floor, protected from the elements by this stone chamber, were papers. Dozens of them, some loose, some in folders, all arranged in neat stacks like someone had been organizing them and never finished. Sarah approached the cabinet slowly. The door wasn't locked. She pulled it open. Inside, illuminated by her phone's light, were rows of boxes, small ones, the kind that might hold jewelry or important documents. Sarah picked up the first one and opened it. Gold coins wrapped in cloth, various dates, different mints, all in pristine condition. She opened another box. More coins. Another. Stock certificates, official-looking with seals and signatures. Another. Bundles of bills, old but in perfect condition, like they'd never been circulated. Sarah's hands started shaking so badly she almost dropped the box. She set it down carefully and backed away. Her mind refused to process what she was seeing. This wasn't possible. Maggie had been comfortable, sure, but not wealthy. Not this kind of wealthy. Not the kind that hid gold coins and stock certificates and cash in a sealed room beneath a forgotten tower. Mama. Emma tugged on her jacket. What is all this? Sarah couldn't answer. She picked up one of the folders from the floor and opened it. Inside were pages of careful handwriting. Maggie's handwriting, listing dates and amounts and names of banks and investment firms, records, decades of records, documentation of purchases, sales, transfers, everything meticulously noted and filed. At the bottom of the stack, Sarah found another letter. Sarah, if you found this, you listened. Thank you. The tower isn't worthless, my girl. It's the most valuable thing I own. Everything in this room represents 60 years of careful planning, smart choices, and a whole lot of patience. I started with nothing and built this slowly, one decision at a time. I never touched it, never spent it. I was waiting for the right person to give it to, someone who would understand what it represents, someone who wouldn't waste it, someone who would honor it by using it wisely. That person is you. The total value is documented in the ledger you're holding. You'll need to get it appraised, authenticated, processed properly. It won't be quick, but it will be worth it. This is your second chance, Sarah, your fresh start. Don't let anyone take it from you, and don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having it. You earn this by being exactly who you are, honest, hardworking, and true. Make me proud. All my love, Grandma Maggie. Sarah sat down hard on the stone floor, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. She opened the ledger with shaking hands, squinting at the columns of numbers in the dim light. Maggie had been thorough. Every single item was listed, every coin with its year and mint mark and estimated value, every certificate with its company and share count and current market price, every bundle of guasha with its denomination and quantity, on and on for pages, a lifetime of accumulation documented with schoolteacher precision. At the bottom of the last page, in larger numbers circled 3 times, was a total, $287,450,000. Sarah stared at the number until it stopped looking like a number and started looking like abstract symbols that couldn't possibly mean what they seemed to mean. She counted the zeros, recounted them, looked at Emma, who was examining a gold coin with the serious expression of a child trying to determine if something was real or pretend. Mama. Emma held up the coin. Is this treasure? Sarah laughed. Then she was crying. Then she was doing both at the same time, clutching her daughter and the ledger and trying to understand that everything had just changed, that the life she'd been grinding through, paycheck to paycheck, crisis to crisis, had just split wide open into something entirely different, something she didn't have words for yet. Yes, baby, Sarah managed to say. Yes, it's treasure. Above them, through the open trap door, sunlight poured down the stone steps like a promise. And for the first time in longer than Sarah could remember, the future looked like something other than survival. They sat in that stone chamber for 20 minutes. Sarah's brain refusing to restart. $287 million. The number kept repeating itself, getting louder each time. She looked at the metal cabinet, at the wooden crate she hadn't even opened yet, at the stacks of papers documenting decades of financial decisions made by a woman who'd lived in a small farmhouse and baked pies for church socials and never once mentioned she was building a fortune. Emma wandered to the corner of the room, tracing her fingers along what looked like carved letters in the stone. "Mama, there's words here." Sarah stood on shaky legs and joined her daughter. Cut into the stone, barely visible unless you knew to look, were words in Maggie's distinctive handwriting, though these had been etched with considerable effort. Foundation built on patience, walls raised with wisdom, fortune secured through faith. "What does it mean?" Emma asked. Sarah touched the carved letters. "I think it means Grandma was a lot smarter than anyone gave her credit for." She spent the next hour going through everything systematically, trying to create some kind of inventory even though she had no idea what half these certificates and documents actually were. Stock certificates from companies she'd never heard of. Some dated back to the 1960s. Bonds, treasury notes, currency from different eras, all preserved in protective sleeves. Letters from banks and investment firms, polite and professional, thanking Margaret Hartwell for her continued business. And underneath everything, providing context and explanation, were Maggie's handwritten records, tracking every transaction, every decision, every calculated risk that had paid off over decades. The wooden crate, when Sarah finally pried it open with a piece of broken stone, contained more of the same. Additional documents, more gold coins sorted by year and mint mark, and several leather-bound journals that appeared to be Maggie's personal financial diaries. Sarah opened one at random and read an entry from 1973. Sold the South 40 acres to the Peterson boy. He paid fair price. Took that money and bought shares in something called Microsoft. The broker said I was crazy. Time will tell. Sarah laughed out loud. Her grandmother had invested in Microsoft in the 1970s, before personal computers were in every home, before anyone knew what an operating system was. Maggie, who'd never owned anything more technologically advanced than a rotary phone, had somehow recognized the value in computer software decades before it became obvious. She kept reading, entry after entry, year after year, careful notes about companies she'd researched, stocks she'd purchased, investments that had grown slowly and steadily over decades. Walmart, Apple, Amazon, Google. Names that were now synonymous with American wealth, all purchased when they were just starting out, when nobody else believed in them. "We need to go," Sarah finally said, though everything in her wanted to stay down here to keep reading, to understand how this had happened. But it was getting late, and she needed time to think, to process, to figure out what came next. More importantly, she needed to make sure this room stayed secret. If Victoria found out about this, if anyone found out before Sarah had time to protect it legally, things would get complicated fast. They climbed back up the stone steps. Sarah carefully lowered the trap door, making sure it settled properly. Then she spent 10 minutes spreading dirt back over it, smoothing it out, making it look undisturbed. When she was satisfied, she took Emma's hand and led her back outside. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the grasslands in shades of amber and gold. Sarah stood there looking at the tower with completely different eyes. This wasn't a ruin. This wasn't a pile of worthless stones. This was a vault, a fortress, a carefully constructed hiding place designed to protect something precious until the right person came along. But as she stood there, something else caught her attention. The tower itself, the structure above ground. She'd always thought the stones were arranged haphazardly, repairs made over the years as needed. But now, looking at it with purpose, Sarah noticed patterns she'd never seen before. The stones weren't random at all. They were deliberately arranged, with specific types of stone placed at specific intervals. Some sections had been built with darker stones, others with lighter ones, creating a subtle pattern that spiraled around the structure. Small marks carved into certain stones at regular intervals. It wasn't just construction, it was communication. Maggie had built a code into the very walls, something that would mean nothing to a casual observer, but everything to someone who knew to look. Sarah pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. The patterns, the marks, the way the stones fit together. She was so absorbed in this task that she didn't hear the truck approaching until it was pulling up next to her Civic. Her heart jumped into her throat. She moved quickly to put herself between Emma and whoever was coming, her mind racing through possibilities. Victoria, come to gloat. A local busybody, come to gossip. Someone who'd heard about the inheritance and wanted to see what the poor sister got stuck with. But the man who climbed out of the old Ford pickup wasn't any of those people. He was elderly, probably early 80s, with white hair and a face carved by decades of Colorado wind. He wore overalls and work boots and moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had started betraying him, but whose will refused to acknowledge it. Didn't mean to startle you. His voice was gravelly but kind. Saw your car from the road. Figured I'd come see who was poking around Maggie's tower. Sarah kept her voice cautious. I'm Sarah, Maggie's granddaughter. The man's face softened. Sarah, of course, should have recognized you. You have her eyes. I'm Frank Wilson. Farmed the property just west of here. Your grandmother and I were neighbors for near about 60 years. Sarah relaxed slightly. The name was familiar. Maggie had mentioned Frank occasionally, usually in the context of him helping fix something or bringing over vegetables from his garden. It's nice to meet you properly. Frank looked at the tower and something passed over his face. Sadness, maybe, or respect, or both. So she left you the tower. It wasn't a question. She did. Everyone thinks it's funny. A pile of rocks, Frank's expression sharpened. Everyone's a fool then? He walked closer to the structure, placing his weathered hand on the stones with a gentleness that suggested affection. Your grandmother bought this property in 1964, paid cash for it. 10 acres of nothing, everyone said. Why'd she want that useless land with that falling down tower? But Maggie just smiled and said she liked the view. You were there when she bought it? Helped her with the paperwork. I was younger then, thought I knew everything. Frank chuckled. Maggie taught me otherwise. She had a way of seeing things other people missed. Value where others saw waste. Possibility where others saw problems. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Do you know anything about this tower? About why it was important to her? Frank turned to look at her, and his eyes were sharp despite his age. I know your grandmother trusted you with it. That tells me everything I need to know. He paused, then added carefully. But I also know she was a woman with layers. What you see on the surface isn't ever the whole story. This tower, for instance, looks like it's been abandoned for 100 years. But Maggie came out here regular. Once a month, like clockwork, for 50 years. Told people she was checking for structural damage, making sure it wasn't going to collapse on some kid who wandered in. He met Sarah's eyes directly. But I always wondered why she needed to check something that never changed. Why she'd spend an hour or more inside when there wasn't anything to see except bird droppings and fallen stones. Why she always brought that old canvas bag with her and left with it looking just as heavy as when she arrived. Sarah's throat tightened. She thought about the chamber below, the gold coins, the stock certificates, the meticulous records of 60 years of wealth accumulation. Frank continued, Your grandmother was protecting something, Sarah. I didn't ask what because it wasn't my business, but I'm glad she gave it to you and not that sister of yours. You know Victoria? Met her a few times over the years. Frank's tone cooled. Cold as a January morning, that one. Maggie worried about her, but she knew better than to give her something requiring character to handle properly. He smiled slightly. You got character, Sarah. Maggie told me so. Said you were the strong one, even if you didn't know it yet. They stood in silence for a moment, and Sarah felt the weight of trust settling over her shoulders like a physical thing. Maggie had been preparing for this, building toward this moment, for decades. Every choice, every investment, every careful decision had been made with Sarah in mind, with the belief that someday Sarah would be standing exactly where she was now, ready to receive what had been hidden. Mr. Wilson, Sarah said carefully, if I needed help understanding something about this tower, about its structure or its history, would you be willing to talk? Anytime. Frank said immediately, I'm 3 miles west, farm with the red barn. You'll see my name on the mailbox. I don't sleep much these days anyway. Old age. He tipped his head toward Emma, who'd been watching this entire exchange with the quiet intensity of a child absorbing adult conversation. Your little one looks hungry. You should get her fed. Thank you, Sarah said, for stopping, for telling me about my grandmother. She was a good woman, best neighbor I ever had. Frank walked back to his truck. You do right by her memory, Sarah. Whatever she left you, she meant for you to have it. He climbed into his truck and drove away, one hand raised in farewell. Sarah stood there until his truck disappeared down the dirt road, her mind racing. Frank had essentially confirmed everything. Maggie had been coming here regularly for 50 years. She'd been protecting something. The tower was more than it appeared. But Frank had been careful not to say too much, respecting Maggie's privacy even after death. That kind of loyalty was rare. Mama, Emma tugged on her jacket. Can we go now? I'm hungry. Yes, baby. Let's go get dinner. They drove back toward Colorado Springs, and Sarah stopped at the diner on Main Street, the same one where she'd worked summers during high school, serving coffee and pancakes to farmers and truck drivers. The place looked exactly the same, down to the crack in the corner booth and the faded Coca-Cola sign above the counter. The waitress, a woman named Debbie, who'd worked there since before Sarah was born, brought them menus and water. She looked at Sarah with recognition and something like sympathy. Heard about Maggie. I'm real sorry, honey. She was good people. Thank you. Debbie hesitated. Also heard about the will. Of course she had. In towns this size, news traveled faster than internet. Debbie's expression turned carefully sympathetic. Don't pay attention to what people are saying. Your grandmother had her reasons for doing things the way she did. What are people saying? Debbie glanced around, then leaned in slightly. That Victoria got the estate and you got stuck with that old tower. That it wasn't fair. That Maggie must have been confused at the end. She straightened up. But I don't believe that for a second. Maggie's mind was sharp as a tack right up until she passed. If she gave you that tower, she had a good reason. Sarah managed a smile. I'm starting to think you're right. They ordered burgers and fries. While they waited, Sarah pulled out her phone and started researching. She typed carefully, conscious of Debbie potentially watching. Hidden wealth, secret fortunes, estate planning. What she found was alarming. Stories of families torn apart by unexpected inheritances, legal battles lasting years, assets frozen during disputes, tax implications that could consume 40% or more of the value before anyone saw a penny. The more she read, the more she understood that having $287 million and actually accessing $287 million were two very different things. She needed help, professional help, a lawyer certainly, probably an accountant, maybe a financial advisor who specialized in large estates. But who could she trust? Anyone she contacted would know about the money. Word would spread, Victoria would find out. The family would descend, the pressure would be immense. Their food arrived, Sarah forced herself to eat, though she could barely taste it. Emma, exhausted from the day's emotional roller coaster, fell asleep in the booth before finishing her fries. Sarah paid the bill, left a generous tip despite her precarious finances, and carried Emma back to the car. She should have driven back to Denver. Should have gone home, put Emma to bed, tried to get some sleep before her shift tomorrow. But instead, she found herself driving back to the tower, pulled by the same force that had brought her here in the first place. The sun had set completely. The tower was just a dark shape against the star-filled sky. Sarah parked and sat in the car for a long moment, listening to Emma's soft breathing from the back seat, trying to gather her thoughts. Then carefully she got out of the car and approached the tower. Her phone's flashlight cut through the darkness. Inside, she moved the dirt aside and opened the trapdoor again. This time, descending those stone steps felt different, less like discovery and more like coming home to a place she'd never been. At the bottom, she opened the metal cabinet systematically and began removing items, studying each one more carefully than before. The bonds were from the United States Treasury, some dating back to the 1950s. The stock certificate is included not just Microsoft, but Apple, Amazon, Google, all purchased when they were starting companies that nobody believed in. Maggie had been ahead of every curve, seeing potential decades before it became profit. The gold coins were from various mints, various years, all in pristine condition. The cash, bundled and wrapped, was old currency. Some of it probably worth more than face value to collectors. But it was the journals that fascinated Sarah most. She sat on the stone floor and began reading through them page by page. watching her grandmother's life unfold in careful handwriting. Maggie had started with almost nothing. Her husband had died young, leaving her with a small amount of savings. She'd sold some farm equipment, invested the proceeds carefully. She'd been patient, letting investments mature over decades. She'd been smart, diversifying, never putting everything in one place. And she'd been secretive, never telling anyone what she was building. An entry from 1989. I don't want them to treat me different. Don't want them to see dollar signs when they look at me. I want to be just Maggie, woman who makes good pie and knows all the best fishing spots. The money is for later, for when it matters, for the person who will use it right. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Maggie had lived simply, modestly, by choice, all while sitting on a fortune that could have bought her anything. She'd done it to protect herself, to maintain her independence, to ensure people loved her for who she was and not what she had. And she'd done it to create this moment, to give Sarah something that couldn't be taken away or diminished or stolen. As Sarah continued reading, she found detailed instructions Maggie had left for exactly this situation. Contact information for a lawyer in Denver. Robert Hayes, someone Maggie had worked with quietly over the years, someone who knew about the fortune and had helped structure it to minimize tax burden and legal complications. Notes about which documents needed to be filed and in what order. Advice about staying quiet until everything was properly secured. Warnings about family members who would contest the will if they knew the truth. Victoria will fight you, Maggie had written. She'll say I wasn't of sound mind. She'll claim undue influence. She'll throw lawyers at you until you're buried in paperwork and stress. But you're stronger than she is, Sarah. You've had to be strong your whole life. She's only ever known comfort. When it gets hard, remember this isn't about money. It's about honoring what I built and using it to build something of your own. Don't let her take that from you. Sarah closed the journal and looked around the small stone chamber. This was more than a hiding place. It was a classroom, a legacy, a blueprint for how to build something meaningful from nothing. Maggie had left her more than money. She'd left her knowledge, experience, wisdom, and the confidence that came from knowing someone believed in her completely. She climbed back up the stairs, covered the trapdoor, and stood in the tower for a moment, feeling the cool night air drifting through the gaps in the stones. Tomorrow she would start making calls. She would contact Robert Hayes. She would begin the process of securing, authenticating, and protecting what Maggie had left her. She would prepare for the battle with Victoria that was surely coming. But tonight she just stood there in the darkness, in this structure that had turned out to be a fortress, and let herself believe that maybe finally things were going to be okay. Sarah walked back to the Civic through darkness so complete she could see the Milky Way strung across the sky like scattered salt. Emma was still asleep in the back seat, curled around the stuffed rabbit. The tower behind them looked like something from a medieval painting, stones black against stars. She drove toward Colorado Springs, but instead of turning north toward Denver, she pulled into the parking lot of a Motel 6. The neon sign flickered vacancy in blue letters. $65 a night. She had $27 left from yesterday's tips, but her credit card still had $300 in available credit before it maxed out. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. Sarah laid Emma on one of the double beds without waking her, then sat at the small desk by the window and opened her laptop, a 5-year-old Dell that took 3 minutes to boot up. She found the business card tucked inside Maggie's letter. Robert Hayes, estate planning attorney. A Denver address in the financial district. Sarah composed an email, choosing each word carefully. Urgent matter regarding Margaret Hartwell estate. Request confidential meeting as soon as possible. Sensitive situation requiring discretion. She hit send at 11 p.m. and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. When the sent confirmation appeared, Sarah closed the laptop and sat in the dark, watching Emma sleep. Her phone buzzed at 7:30 the next morning. An email from Robert Hayes sent at 7:15. I've been expecting to hear from you. Margaret was a valued client and friend for many years. I understand you have questions about your inheritance. I'm available to meet today if you can get to Denver. This matter should be handled quickly and discreetly. Please call my direct line to arrange. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a professional male voice answered. Robert Hayes speaking. Mr. Hayes, this is Sarah Mitchell. I just received your email, Miss Mitchell. His voice warmed slightly. Thank you for calling. First, let me extend my condolences on Margaret's passing. She was a remarkable woman. Thank you. I assume you've discovered what was hidden at the tower? Sarah glanced at Emma, still sleeping. Yesterday. Good. That means we can move forward efficiently. Robert's tone became businesslike. How much did you remove from the location? Nothing. I documented everything with photos, but I left it all there. Excellent. That's very smart. Don't remove anything until we have proper security and insurance in place. Can you come to Denver today? We have a great deal to discuss, and time is somewhat critical. Critical how? Your sister filed a petition yesterday afternoon to contest the will. She's claiming your grandmother suffered from dementia and was unduly influenced. The petition requests that all assets be frozen pending investigation. Sarah's stomach dropped. She doesn't know what she's actually contesting yet, but she will soon. We need to move faster than she does, Robert continued. I need you to understand something, Miss Mitchell. Don't tell anyone what you found. Not your mother, not friends, not anyone. Don't post on social media. Don't make any changes to your life that would indicate sudden wealth. Act exactly as you did before. Can you do that? Yes, be at my office at 2 p.m. this afternoon. The address is in my email. Come alone if possible. We have considerable work to do. After they hung up, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process. Victoria was already attacking, already filing legal motions, already trying to take what wasn't hers. But Victoria didn't know about the $287 million. She thought she was fighting over a pile of rocks. Sarah woke Emma gently and explained they were staying one more night. Emma accepted this with the easy adaptability of children who'd learned not to question when plans changed. They walked to a McDonald's 3 blocks away, and Sarah bought breakfast. $5 she couldn't afford, but Emma needed to eat. The drive to Denver took 90 minutes. Sarah dropped Emma at Mrs. Chen's apartment with $40 for the full day, promising to be back by 6. Mrs. Chen looked concerned but asked no questions. Robert Hayes's office occupied the 23rd floor of a glass tower downtown, the kind of building where the elevator required a key card and the lobby smelled like money. Sarah rode up alone, watching the floors tick by on the digital display, her reflection ghostly in the polished doors. The receptionist had perfect makeup and a smile that suggested she'd been trained to make visitors feel simultaneously welcome and inadequate. She offered coffee in a voice that made it clear the coffee was excellent. Sarah accepted water instead. At 2 p.m. exactly, an inner door opened. Robert Hayes was late 60s, silver hair combed back from a face that suggested both intelligence and wariness. Wire-rimmed glasses, expensive suit that fit like it had been tailored. He shook Sarah's hand with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Denver's skyline. Law books lined one wall, probably hadn't been opened in years, just decoration for clients who expected lawyers to be surrounded by leather and gilt. Robert gestured to a chair across from his desk and settled into his own. $287,450,000. He read from a document on his desk. That's the conservative estimate based on current market values, before taxes, before legal fees, before any adjustments. Your grandmother was, quite frankly, one of the most astute investors I've ever worked with in 4 decades of practice. Sarah stared at the number written on the paper he turned toward her. Seeing it in black and white, officially calculated and certified, made it more real and somehow less comprehensible simultaneously. How? The question came out barely louder than a whisper. How did she do this? Robert pulled out a chart showing the growth of Maggie's portfolio over time. The line started nearly flat in the early 60s, began climbing in the 70s, accelerated through the 80s, shot upward in the 90s, and exploded in the 2000s and beyond. Patience, primarily. Margaret started investing in 1962, right after your grandfather died. She had about $12,000 from selling some farm equipment and a small life insurance policy. Most widows in her position would have held on to that money desperately, living off it slowly. Margaret invested it. He tapped the chart. She bought stock in a new company called Walmart. Sam Walton was just starting to expand beyond Arkansas. People thought she was insane. 5 years later, that investment was worth $200,000. She sold half, invested the profits in other companies, kept the rest. And she just kept doing that over and over for 60 years. Robert pulled out another document. She had perfect timing, not because she was lucky, but because she did her research. She read annual reports cover to cover. She attended shareholder meetings, drove to Arkansas for Walmart, flew to Seattle for Microsoft. She talked to people who worked at the companies she was considering. She looked for businesses that solved real problems, had good management, and treated their employees well. And then she held those investments for decades, letting compound interest work. But why hide it? Sarah heard the bewilderment in her own voice. Why live in that farmhouse? Drive that old whack? Sure. Dress in clothes from the thrift store when she could have had anything. Because she was wise enough to know that money changes people. Robert leaned back in his chair. Changes how they see you. Changes how you see yourself. Margaret and I had many conversations about this over the years. She watched what happened to families when sudden wealth entered the picture. Cousins fighting over inheritances. Children who never worked a day because they didn't have to. Grandchildren who felt entitled to things they hadn't earned. She wanted no part of that. So she lived simply, invested quietly, and waited. Waited for what? For you. Robert's expression softened. She talked about you constantly, Sarah, about how hard you worked, how you raised Emma alone after that worthless ex-husband abandoned you both, how you never complained, never asked for help, just kept pushing forward no matter what. She said you had character. That's the word she always used. Character. She believed you would use this fortune the way she intended, not to stop working or stop striving, but to have choices, to help others, to build something meaningful. Sarah's throat tightened. And Victoria? Robert's face hardened. Your sister is exactly the kind of person Margaret was trying to avoid. Someone who measures worth in dollar signs. Someone who feels entitled to things simply because she exists. Someone who would have spent this money on status symbols and squandered it within a generation. He pulled another document from his folder. This is the petition Victoria filed yesterday. It's quite aggressive. She's claiming Margaret suffered from dementia, that you exercised undue influence, that the will should be invalidated and the estate divided equally between you both. But that's not true. Sarah's protest came out sharper than intended. Grandma was completely coherent. I barely saw her the last 2 years because I was working so much, I know. And we can prove it. Robert's voice carried certainty. Margaret anticipated this exact scenario. She had cognitive assessments done by 3 different neurologists in the months before she died. All of them certified she was of sound mind. She also kept detailed records of every interaction with family members, including dates, and summaries of conversations. She documented that you visited infrequently because of work and distance, while Victoria visited even less frequently and usually only to ask for money. Robert straightened the papers on his desk. Here's what's going to happen next. Victoria's lawyers will request financial disclosure. They'll want to know the extent of the estate. Once they learn about the $287 million, they'll increase their efforts exponentially. They'll dig into your life looking for anything they can use. They'll interview people you know, trying to find someone who'll say you manipulated Margaret. They'll make this ugly, public, and painful. Can they win? No, Margaret's planning was too thorough, but they can delay things, tie up the assets, make your life miserable for months or even years, unless we're smarter than they are. Robert pulled out another set of documents, and his expression carried something that might have been satisfaction. Margaret established an irrevocable trust 20 years ago. She's been transferring assets into it gradually over time. You're named as the sole beneficiary. The trust assets aren't technically part of the estate, which means they're not subject to probate and can't be contested through the will. That's approximately $180 million of the total. Sarah tried to absorb this. So I have access to that money now? Once we complete the authentication and transfer process, yes, approximately 3 weeks. The remaining $107 million is in the estate proper, and that will be subject to Victoria's legal challenge. But here's the beautiful part. He pulled out the trust document and pointed to a specific clause. Margaret specified in the trust documents that if anyone contests the will, They forfeit any claim to trust assets and their share of the estate drops to $1. It's called a no contest clause, and it's perfectly legal in Colorado. Sarah processed this slowly. So if Victoria keeps fighting, she gets nothing? Exactly nothing. Robert's voice carried grim satisfaction. But she doesn't know that yet. Her lawyers are operating under the assumption this is a standard estate dispute. They don't know about the trust, the amount of money involved, or the consequences of their actions. Margaret wanted it this way. She wanted to give Victoria one chance to back off gracefully before destroying her claim entirely. That seems almost cruel. Does it? Robert raised an eyebrow. Or is it a final attempt to teach Victoria a lesson about greed and consequences? Margaret hoped that once Victoria understood what she was risking, she might actually reflect on her choices, might become a better person. It was probably naive, but your grandmother always believed in second chances. Sarah sat quietly, processing. She thought about Emma, about the eviction notice, about the stack of medical bills. She thought about her grandmother spending 60 years building something meaningful, trusting Sarah to honor that work. What do I need to do? Robert outlined the plan. His team would begin authenticating the documents and assets immediately. A security company would discreetly remove everything from the tower chamber and transport it to a secure vault in Denver. Frank Wilson would supervise to ensure nobody in Colorado Springs noticed the activity. And Sarah would go back to her regular life, working at the diner, living in her apartment, acting like nothing had changed until everything was properly secured. This is critical, Sarah. Robert's voice carried weight. Victoria cannot know you've been here, cannot know you found the money, cannot know you're preparing. The element of surprise is crucial. Let her think you're just a poor single mother who got stuck with a pile of rocks. Let her feel confident. Let her overreach. And when the time is right, we'll end this permanently. Sarah left the office at 4 p.m. feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life. She took the elevator down 23 floors, walked through the gleaming lobby, and emerged onto a Denver street where people rushed past talking on phones, carrying coffee, living normal lives where $287 million was an incomprehensible abstraction. She picked up Emma from Mrs. Chen's drove back to their apartment in silence while Emma chattered about the day. The eviction notice was still taped to the door, pink and threatening. Inside, the bills were still stacked on the counter. The check engine light still glowed in the Civic. Everything looked exactly the same, but nothing was the same at all. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Sarah started a list. What she actually wanted to do with this money, this responsibility, this impossible gift. Not about buying things, about building something. Something that lasted, something that helped people who needed help, something that would make Maggie proud. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Sarah's life. She went to work at Morrison's Diner, smiled at customers, refilled coffee cups, and pretended everything was normal, while her entire world was being dismantled and reconstructed in secret. Robert's team worked with remarkable speed. Authentication of the documents proceeded around the clock. The tower chamber was emptied over 2 nights, everything transported in unmarked vehicles. Frank Wilson called Sarah once to confirm the operation had gone smoothly. Nobody in town had noticed anything unusual. But Victoria was escalating. Her lawyers filed motion after motion, requesting information, demanding depositions, trying to force disclosure. Sarah received a subpoena to give a deposition in Victoria's attorney's office. 3 aggressive lawyers in expensive suits asking increasingly hostile questions about her relationship with Maggie. How often had she visited? What had they discussed? Had she ever suggested Maggie change her will? Had she asked for money? Had she complained about Victoria's inheritance? Sarah answered every question honestly and simply. She had nothing to hide because she'd done nothing wrong. But the strain was showing. She lost 8 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. Sleep became impossible. She'd lie awake listening to Emma breathe, mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Every time her phone rang, her heart would hammer. Emma noticed, "Mama, are you okay? Is something wrong? Why can't we go back to the tower?" Sarah would say everything was fine, just work stress, nothing to worry about. But 8-year-olds were perceptive. Emma knew things weren't fine at all. 2 weeks into the process, Robert called with news. We've discovered something about the main house Victoria inherited. Margaret took out a $4.2 million mortgage on the property 8 months before she died. The bank has a lien on the house and land. After the mortgage is paid off, Victoria's actual inheritance is only worth approximately $600,000. Sarah sat down hard on her bed. Why would Grandma do that? Because she was brilliant. Robert's voice carried admiration. She knew Victoria would contest the will. She wanted to ensure that when Victoria triggered the no contest clause, the actual loss would be minimal. She used the mortgage money to buy more gold and bonds and added them to the tower stash. It was a final strategic move, decades in planning. 3 weeks and 2 days after Sarah's first meeting with Robert, everything was ready. The authentication was complete. The trust assets were secured. The legal framework was ironclad. Robert filed a comprehensive response to Victoria's contest that laid out everything: the existence of the trust, the full value of the estate, Maggie's cognitive assessments, the documented evidence of Victoria's repeated requests for money and Maggie's refusals, and most damning of all, the no contest clause that meant Victoria's legal challenge had just cost her any claim to the inheritance. Robert called Sarah at work. It's done. The response was filed an hour ago. Victoria's lawyers are receiving it as we speak. By tonight, this will be over. Sarah had to sit down. Her manager, Denise, brought her water, asking if she was okay. Sarah nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by relief and terror in equal measure. There's one more thing. Robert's voice turned serious. The local news picked up the story. A $287 million estate dispute in small-town Colorado makes compelling headlines. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know your life is about to change in ways you can't control. Sarah, are you ready? She wasn't. How could anyone be ready for that? But she said yes anyway because what else was there to say? That night, Victoria called. Sarah almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. For a long moment, there was just silence on the line. Then Victoria spoke, and her voice was different, smaller, shocked. 287 million. Yes, she had $287 million and lived like a pauper. Drove a rusted car, wore the same clothes for 30 years. Victoria's voice cracked. Let me think. She was poor while she was secretly rich? She wasn't secretly rich. She was privately wealthy. There's a difference. Don't lecture me. Victoria's voice carried an edge of hysteria. You got 287 million, Sarah. Do you understand that? Do you understand what you took from me? I didn't take anything from you. Grandma gave you exactly what she wanted you to have. 4.8 million in property. More money than most people see in a lifetime. But it wasn't enough for you. It's never enough for you. Because you got more. Because she chose you over me. Victoria was crying now, something Sarah had rarely heard. Her own granddaughter, and she chose you. Why? What did you do to make her love you more? Sarah's answer came out quiet but firm. Nothing. I just loved her without expecting anything in return. I called her every week, even when I was exhausted. I brought Emma to visit, even though the drive was long and gas was expensive. I listened to her stories, even though I'd heard them 100 times. Not because I wanted her money. I didn't even know she had money. I did it because she was my grandmother, and I loved her. The silence on the line stretched out like wire pulled taut, and I didn't. Victoria's voice was barely audible. Did you love her? Or did you love what you thought she could give you? Because every time you visited, you asked for something. Money for a car, money for a vacation, money for investments. Grandma kept records of every conversation. I've seen them. You treated her like a bank, not a person. Silence again. Then Victoria's voice stripped of its usual confidence. What about the house, the estate? The house is mortgaged. After the bank's paid, you'll have about $600,000 left. And the no contest clause is enforceable. Robert confirmed it. By filing to contest the will, you forfeited your claim. The house reverts to the estate, which means it comes to me. You get $1 as specified in the trust documents. That's it. Sarah heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath. You could give me some. You could share. We're sisters, Sarah. We are. And if you'd approach this differently, If you'd been kind, if you'd shown even a little understanding or compassion, maybe we could have worked something out. But you didn't. You called me a liar. You threatened me. You tried to take from me something Grandma specifically wanted me to have. So no, Victoria, I'm not giving you anything. You made your choice. Now live with it. Sarah hung up before her sister could respond. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to set the phone down. She felt nauseated, angry, triumphant, guilty, everything at once, a storm of emotion that had no outlet. Emma appeared in the doorway of their bedroom, clutching her rabbit. Mama, are you crying? A little bit, baby, but it's okay. Sometimes grown-ups cry when big things happen. Good big things or bad big things? Sarah pulled her daughter into her lap. Both, I think. Life is complicated like that. The next morning, Sarah's phone exploded. Calls, texts, messages, flooding in so fast the phone couldn't keep up. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to catch up. Distant relatives she'd met once at funerals called to congratulate her. Former coworkers asked if she was hiring. Her inbox filled with requests for money, investment opportunities, business proposals. The diner manager, Roger, called to say reporters were waiting outside her apartment building. Robert called to say they needed security immediately. Sarah's mother called from Florida, her voice shrill with questions Sarah couldn't answer. Sarah sat on her bed with Emma beside her watching cartoons and felt the full weight of what was happening crash down like a wave. This was her life now. Public, scrutinized, judged. Everyone would have an opinion about what she should do with the money, how she should spend it, whether she deserved it. Privacy was gone. Anonymity was gone. The simple, struggling life she'd known for 25 years was completely gone, burned away in the glare of sudden wealth. But as she sat there, paralyzed by the magnitude of it all, she remembered something Maggie had written in one of those journals. Money is just a tool. It's what you build with it that matters. Don't let the tool use you. You use the tool. Sarah took a deep breath, then another. Then she picked up her phone and started making calls. First to Robert, to arrange security and establish protocols for handling the media. Then to Morrison's diner to give her notice. She felt guilty about that. They'd been good to her, but she couldn't keep working there with reporters following her everywhere. Then to Frank Wilson to thank him for everything and ask if he'd help her figure out what to do with Maggie's farmhouse. By noon, there were 3 security guards outside her apartment building, keeping reporters at bay. By evening, Robert had scheduled a press conference for the following day where Sarah would make a brief statement and then refuse further questions. By nighttime, Sarah had started writing down ideas for what she actually wanted to build with this fortune. The court hearing happened 2 weeks later. Victoria showed up with her lawyers, looking defeated but defiant in a way that suggested she hadn't quite accepted reality yet. Sarah sat across the courtroom with Robert beside her, feeling like she was watching a play about someone else's life. The judge reviewed the documents, asked a few questions, and ruled in Sarah's favor in less than 30 minutes. The trust was valid. The will was valid. Margaret had been of sound mind. The no contest clause was enforceable. Victoria's challenge was dismissed with prejudice. The judge looked at Sarah. Do you have anything you'd like to say to your sister? Sarah looked at Victoria. Really looked. She saw not the cruel, ambitious woman Victoria had become, but the sister she'd once been. The girl who'd taught Sarah to ride a bike. The teenager who'd defended her from bullies at school. The young woman who'd left for college and somehow lost herself along the way, chasing status and wealth and approval until she'd forgotten what actually mattered. I'm sorry it ended this way. Sarah's voice was quiet but carried through the courtroom. I'm sorry Grandma felt she couldn't trust you with this, and I'm sorry you can't see that she was trying to teach you something, even at the end. It was never about the money, Victoria. It was always about character. Maybe someday you'll understand that. Victoria didn't respond. She just stood up, gathered her things, and walked out of the courtroom. Her lawyers followed. Sarah knew she'd probably never see her sister again. That should have made her sad. Maybe someday it would. Right now, she just felt tired. Robert put a hand on her shoulder. It's over, Sarah, truly over. The estate is yours, the money is yours, the future is yours. What are you going to do with it? Sarah thought about Maggie spending 60 years building something meaningful. Thought about Emma growing up with opportunities Sarah had never had. Thought about all the single mothers struggling everywhere, one bad month away from disaster. I'm going to build something, something that lasts, something that helps people who need help, something that would make Grandma proud. She already is proud of you. Robert's voice was gentle. Trust me, I spent 20 years watching her prepare for this moment. She knew exactly who you were and exactly what you'd become. You've already made her proud just by being you. They walked out of the courthouse together into bright Colorado afternoon. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Security created a path to the car. Sarah held Emma's hand and walked through it all with her head up and her shoulders back, just like Maggie had taught her, ready to face whatever came next. 3 days later, Sarah's phone rang. California number she didn't recognize. She almost declined, but something made her answer. The voice on the other end was Victoria's, but stripped of all its usual confidence. Small, defeated. It's me. Robert said you'd be willing to talk. I am. How are you, Victoria? Long silence. Then words that came out like they were being pulled with pliers. I'm living in my car, Sarah. Showering at a gym. Can barely afford the membership. I'm eating once a day if I'm lucky. I lost everything. What happened to the 600,000? Victoria's voice cracked. I mortgaged the house before the court case, thinking I'd need money for lawyers. When I lost, the bank foreclosed. The land sold. After the mortgage was paid off, there was barely anything left. I used that to move to California thinking I could start over. But jobs fell through. Apartments were too expensive. Everything spiraled. She was crying now, openly. I made mistakes, Sarah. I know that. I was greedy. I was cruel. I destroyed everything because I couldn't stand that you got more than me. Why are you calling? Because I'm desperate. Because I don't know what else to do. Victoria's voice broke completely. Because you're my sister, and I'm asking for help. Sarah sat with the phone pressed to her ear, listening to her sister cry. This was the moment, the test, the choice between mercy and justice, between forgiveness and consequence. She could say no, could tell Victoria she'd made her bed and now had to lie in it, could let her sister experience the full weight of her choices. Nobody would blame her. Even Maggie had cut Victoria off financially. But she thought about those journals, about Maggie's words carved into stone. Character isn't what you do when it's easy, it's what you do when it's hard. When the person asking for help doesn't deserve it. When forgiving costs you something. When being kind means being vulnerable. I'll help you, Victoria. Sarah's voice was steady. But not the way you're thinking. I'm not giving you money. I'm giving you opportunity. She explained the foundation she was building. The program for women in crisis. Temporary shared housing. Job training. Counseling. Support services. If Victoria completed the program successfully, the foundation would help her transition to permanent housing and stable employment. The silence on the line stretched so long, Sarah thought Victoria had hung up. Then quietly, you want me to live in a shelter? I want you to rebuild your life properly, with support, with accountability, with the humility to accept that you need help and the courage to do the work required to change. You can say no, Victoria. Can hang up right now and never call me again. But if you say yes, you have to actually commit. No cutting corners, no expecting special treatment because you're my sister. You'd be just another woman in the program, following the same rules, doing the same work. And if I complete it, then you'll have job skills, stable housing, the foundation of a real life. Not a life built on appearance or status or other people's money. A life built on your own effort and ability. Isn't that what you've always wanted? To be successful on your own merits? Another long silence. Then barely audible. When can I start? 2 weeks later, Sarah drove to the foundation's residential facility and watched Victoria arrive with everything she owned in 2 garbage bags. Her sister looked different, thinner, older. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a thrift store t-shirt. The perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. The manicured nails were bare and bitten. They stood in the parking lot, awkward and uncertain. Finally, Victoria spoke. Thank you for this, for not just sending me away. Don't thank me yet. The program is hard. Most women who start don't finish. It requires real change, real work, real honesty about your mistakes. I know. Victoria's voice was small. Sarah already went over everything with me. I'm ready, or at least I'm willing to try. That's all anyone can ask. Sarah started to walk away, then turned back. Victoria, one more thing. Grandma didn't cut you out because she didn't love you. She cut you out because she loved you enough to let you face the consequences of your choices. She believed that struggle builds character, that hardship teaches lessons comfort never can. She was giving you a gift, even if it didn't feel like one. Don't waste it. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. I won't. I promise I won't. 9 months after Sarah first opened that trap door, she stood in the lobby of a building that hadn't existed when this all began. The Margaret Hartwell Foundation occupied 3 floors of renovated warehouse space in downtown Denver, all exposed brick and high ceilings and windows that let in so much light, the whole place seemed to glow from within. The mission statement was etched into the glass entrance doors in Maggie's own handwriting, reproduced from one of those journals. Not charity, but opportunity. Not handouts, but hand-ups. Not sympathy, but partnership. Sarah walked through the building with a clipboard, checking on programs, listening to stories. In the job training center, a woman named Patricia bent over a computer learning medical coding, skills that would let her work from home once she completed the certification. Down the hall, the childcare facility held 23 kids this morning, playing under the supervision of qualified teachers while their mothers attended classes or job interviews or counseling sessions. Upstairs in the housing office, a counselor named David was helping a woman named Jennifer navigate the process of leaving an abusive relationship, finding safe housing for her and her 2 kids, filing restraining orders, connecting her with legal aid, the kind of comprehensive support that meant the difference between surviving and actually rebuilding. The foundation had already helped 312 single mothers in Colorado, not just writing checks, but providing the full infrastructure needed for real change. Job training in fields with actual demand, medical coding, paralegal work, IT support, childcare assistance that didn't just subsidize but provided quality care, mental health services because poverty was trauma and trauma needed treatment, legal aid because the system was designed to grind down people who couldn't afford lawyers, and most importantly, a community. Women who understood what it meant to be one crisis away from losing everything because they'd been there themselves. Who could look at a new arrival carrying everything she owned in garbage bags and say, without pity or judgment, I've been exactly where you are, and here's how we're going to get through this together. Sarah had spent these 9 months learning what it meant to be wealthy. The education had been brutal in ways she hadn't anticipated. Having money didn't make problems disappear. It just changed which problems you had. Instead of worrying about rent, she worried about investment strategies and asset allocation and whether the foundation's endowment was properly diversified. Instead of managing a household budget of $1,500 a month, she managed a foundation budget in the tens of millions. She'd hired experts, listened to their advice, made mistakes and adjusted course, learned that good intentions weren't enough. You needed systems, accountability, constant evaluation. That throwing money at problems often made them worse if you didn't understand the underlying causes. That the women who came through the program didn't need saving, they needed resources and time, and someone to believe they were capable of saving themselves. The most meaningful project, though, was the tower. Sarah had decided early that the structure where Maggie had hidden a fortune should become something symbolic, a reminder of what was possible when you combined vision and patience and faith in a better future. She'd hired architects who specialized in historical restoration, engineers who understood stone structures, contractors who'd worked on projects like this before. The plan was to rebuild the tower properly, not as a museum, but as a functioning structure. Modern wind turbines would be installed at the top, generating electricity that would feed back into the grid, reducing power costs for the entire rural area around Colorado Springs. A tangible daily benefit from Maggie's legacy. The restoration had taken nearly a year. During that time, the contractors had found something unexpected. Sarah was in a foundation board meeting when her phone buzzed with a call from the lead architect, a woman named Rebecca Chen, who'd worked on historical preservation projects across the West. There's something you need to see. Rebecca's voice carried barely contained excitement. We found another chamber. Sarah drove to Colorado Springs that afternoon, Emma beside her in the passenger seat. Her daughter had turned 9 3 weeks ago. They lived in a house now, not a mansion, just a comfortable 4-bedroom in a good neighborhood with a yard where Emma could play. Emma had adjusted to their new life with the resilience of children, accepting changes without questioning them too deeply. New school, new friends, clothes that actually fit. But Sarah had been careful to maintain normalcy. Emma still had chores, still heard the word no regularly, still understood that money was responsibility, not license. The tower rose against the Rocky Mountains, partially scaffolded now, reconstruction about 60% complete. Rebecca met them at the base, hard hat in hand, practically vibrating with discovery. We were reinforcing the floor of the original chamber. Rebecca led them inside and down the stone steps Sarah had descended that first day. But when we tested the stones, we found anomalies. One section sounded hollow. We removed the stones carefully and found this. She pointed to a section of floor where stones had been removed, revealing another staircase descending deeper. This one was narrower, steeper, carved more roughly. It led down another 12 feet to a second chamber, smaller than the first, maybe 6 by 6 feet. Inside were more wooden crates in a metal box Sarah hadn't seen before. But what caught her attention immediately were the letters scattered across a stone shelf. Dozens of them, yellowed with age, tied with string. Rebecca handed Sarah one bundle. Their correspondence between your grandmother and someone named J.W. dated over 40 years. We didn't read them. They're your property. But Sarah, whoever this person was, they were involved in something significant. That night in her study, Sarah read through the letters chronologically. J.W. was James Wellington, a hedge fund manager in New York who died 6 years ago according to the dates. The letters revealed a partnership that had lasted nearly 4 decades. Wellington had been Maggie's secret investment partner, someone who'd believed in her vision enough to provide access to institutional investment opportunities that a retired school teacher from Colorado couldn't access alone. He'd managed larger positions for her, the kind of investments that required minimum buy-ins of hundreds of thousands or millions. And he'd done it without taking fees because, as he'd written in one letter, I believe in what you're building, Margaret. I want to see what happens when someone with your patience and wisdom has access to the tools usually reserved for people born into wealth. When Wellington died, he transferred his entire portion of their joint investments to Maggie's control. According to the final letter dated 5 years ago, that portion amounted to $65 million. Maggie had added it to the tower stash and never told anyone. Sarah sat back in her chair, processing. The fortune was even larger than she'd thought. But more importantly, Maggie hadn't done this alone. She'd had a mentor, someone who'd believed in her vision and supported it without demanding credit or control, someone who'd used his position to open doors that would have stayed closed otherwise. The second discovery came 3 weeks later. The architect studying the tower's exterior patterns called Sarah with another finding. Those marks you photographed 9 months ago, the ones carved into specific stones, they're not decorative, they're coordinates. Rebecca explained that the pattern of marks, when translated through a specific cipher that took her team 2 weeks to crack, formed GPS coordinates. The coordinates led to a location on Maggie's original property, about half a mile from the tower itself. Sarah, Frank Wilson, and a small excavation team went to the location on a cold November morning. The coordinates pointed to an unremarkable spot in a field that had been fallow for decades. But ground-penetrating radar showed an anomaly 3 feet down. They dug carefully. 2 feet down, they hit something solid. A metal container, roughly 3 feet by 2 feet, welded shut and wrapped in layers of waterproof material. It took an hour to extract it safely. Back at the foundation offices, with Robert Hayes present for legal documentation, they opened the container. Inside were gold bars, 68 of them, each one stamped with official mint marks and serial numbers, each one worth approximately $95,000 at current prices. Robert did the math on his calculator, approximately $6.5 million in gold. He looked at Sarah with something like awe. Your grandmother was preparing for every contingency. If paper assets ever became worthless, if the market crashed, if currency collapsed, if the entire financial system failed, She had physical wealth as backup. She was thinking 3 moves ahead, even after death. Sarah made a decision. The gold would stay buried. Not all of it. She'd have 2 bars authenticated and liquidated to establish provenance and value. But the rest would remain in that location, coordinates known only to her and Robert and Frank. An emergency fund for the foundation. If the economy collapsed, if disaster struck, if everything else failed, the foundation could continue operating. Women in crisis would still have somewhere to turn. The tower restoration was scheduled for completion in May, exactly 1 year after Sarah had first opened that trapdoor. The grand opening would be on a Saturday. Sarah sent invitations to everyone who'd been part of this journey: Frank and Martha Wilson, Robert Hayes, the foundation staff, the first graduating class of women from the residential program, and Victoria. Sarah had watched her sister's transformation over 8 months with a mixture of hope and wariness. Victoria had struggled with the program initially, balked at the rules, resented the shared living space, bristled at having to answer to counselors and program directors. There'd been setbacks, a relapse into old patterns, conflicts with other residents, moments when Sarah thought Victoria might quit entirely. But she'd kept showing up, kept trying. She'd completed job training as a paralegal and discovered she was actually good at legal research and document preparation. She'd made friends with other women in the program, women whose stories were different from hers, but whose struggles she recognized. She'd started volunteering to help new arrivals, using her own failures as teaching moments. Slowly, gradually, the entitled and bitter woman who'd arrived with 2 garbage bags had transformed into someone humbler, someone more real, someone who understood that the greatest poverty wasn't lack of money but lack of purpose. Victoria had completed the program 3 weeks ago. She had a job now at a law firm in Denver that had hired 3 of the foundation's paralegal graduates. She had an apartment, small but hers, furnished with things she'd bought herself. She was rebuilding her life one deliberate choice at a time. When Sarah called to invite her to the tower opening, Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, "I don't know if I should come. I don't know if we're ready for that. I think we should try." Sarah's voice was careful. Not because everything's fixed or forgiven, but because Grandma would want us there together. Both of us, seeing what her life's work became. Another pause. Then, "Okay, I'll come, but Sarah, I'm not expecting us to be close again. I know I destroyed that. I just want you to know I'm grateful for the chance you gave me, for not giving up on me even when I'd given up on myself." The day of the grand opening arrived with perfect Colorado weather. Clear sky, gentle wind, temperature in the mid-70s. The tower rose against the mountains, fully restored now, stones cleaned and reinforced, gaps filled, structure sound. At the top, modern wind turbines turned slowly, generating power, converting invisible potential into tangible electricity. More than 200 people gathered. Frank and Martha Wilson stood in the front row, both beaming. Robert Hayes came from Denver with his wife. The foundation staff arrived in a chartered bus. 15 women from the residential program, success stories, women who'd come in broken and left whole, stood together in a cluster, supporting each other. And standing slightly apart from everyone else, looking nervous and out of place, was Victoria. She dressed simply: jeans, a plain blouse, no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back without styling. She looked like someone who'd learned the difference between appearing successful and actually becoming it. Sarah stepped up to the podium that had been erected at the tower's base. The wind carried her words across the crowd. "1 year ago, I stood in this tower and thought my grandmother had left me nothing." She paused, letting that land. A pile of rocks, a broken structure. Evidence that I wasn't valued, wasn't loved, wasn't important. I was wrong about all of that. She gestured to the tower behind her. "My grandmother left me everything. Not just money, though, there was certainly that. She left me a lesson about patience, about building slowly and carefully over time, letting compound interest and compound effort work their magic. She left me a lesson about character, about being someone trustworthy enough to handle responsibility without letting it corrupt you. She left me a lesson about vision, about seeing potential where others see only waste and ruin." Sarah's voice strengthened, and most importantly, She left me a lesson about legacy, about building something that lasts beyond your own life. This structure has stood here for over 150 years. It's been abandoned, forgotten, dismissed as worthless, but it was never worthless. It was waiting for someone to see what it could become. She looked directly at Victoria. That's what my grandmother understood. That's what she tried to teach all of us. You are never worthless. Even when life has beaten you down, even when you have made mistakes, terrible mistakes that cost you everything, even when the world has dismissed you as just another broken thing in need of repair. The crowd was completely silent now. We all have value. We all have potential. We all deserve second chances. The question is whether we're brave enough to take them, humble enough to accept help, strong enough to do the hard work of becoming who we're meant to be. Applause rippled through the crowd. Sarah stepped down from the podium and walked through the people gathered until she reached Victoria. Her sister was crying, tears streaming down her face in a way that suggested these were the first honest tears she'd cried in years. That was about me, wasn't it? Victoria's voice was barely audible. The part about second chances, it was about everyone. Sarah's tone was gentle, including me. I got a second chance I didn't expect and didn't earn. All I did was love Grandma and try to be a good person. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the universe decides to give you what you need rather than what you deserve. She held out her hand. Want to see the museum? There are pictures of Grandma in there you've probably never seen. Stories from her life that I only learned about after she died. Victoria took her hand. They walked into the tower together, past the polite crowd, into the quiet space where Maggie's story was displayed on walls and in cases and through carefully preserved documents. The ground floor had been converted into a museum room. Glass cases held some of the journals Maggie had written, open to significant pages. Photographs covered one wall, Maggie as a young woman standing beside this very tower in 1964, holding a deed, looking determined and fierce. Maggie in her 70s, teaching at the elementary school, surrounded by students who adored her. Maggie at 85, sitting in her farmhouse kitchen, flour on her hands, that slight smile that suggested she knew secrets nobody else did. Interactive displays explained compound interest, showed how small investments grew over decades. Let visitors experiment with different scenarios. What if you invested $100 a month starting at age 20? What if you held a stock for 30 years instead of selling after one? What if you believed in companies when nobody else did? She was remarkable. Victoria touched the glass case holding one of the journals. I never appreciated that when she was alive. Just thought she was old and stuck in the past. I didn't see what she'd built, didn't understand what she was trying to teach us. Neither did I. Sarah stood beside her sister, not until after she was gone. Maybe that's part of the lesson. Maybe we never really see the full measure of people until we have enough distance to understand their choices, until we've lived long enough to recognize wisdom when we finally encounter it. They stood in silence looking at their grandmother's face in those old photographs, trying to recognize themselves in her features, in her story, in the legacy she'd left behind. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice small and uncertain. I don't expect us to be close again. I know I destroyed that, but maybe someday we could be sisters again. Not like we were before, but something new. Something honest, something built on who we actually are instead of who we pretended to be. I'd like that, Sarah's voice was sincere. When you're ready. When I'm ready. When we've both learned enough to try again without hurting each other. Deal. They walked back outside where the crowd had dispersed into smaller groups. Emma was playing with Frank Wilson's granddaughter, the two of them chasing each other around the tower's base, laughing with the unself-conscious joy of children who had no idea what weight this place carried for the adults around them. Sarah watched her daughter and thought about the future Emma would have, not just because of money, though that certainly helped, but because Emma was growing up watching her mother build something meaningful, watching women lift each other up instead of tearing each other down, learning that the greatest privilege in life wasn't wealth, but the opportunity to use whatever resources you had to make things better for people who came after. Frank Wilson came over, leaning on his cane, moving slower than he had 9 months ago, but still sharp-eyed and present. Margaret would be so proud of all this. Of you. of what you've built from what she left. I hope so. Sarah's voice carried uncertainty. I keep wondering if I'm doing it right. If this is what she wanted, if I'm honoring her vision or just imposing my own. You're not honoring it. Frank's correction was gentle but firm. You're continuing it. That's better. Honoring the past is fine. Building monuments, preserving history, but continuing the work, building on the foundation, making it grow and change and serve new people in new ways. That's what legacy actually means. That's what your grandmother understood. She didn't want a museum. She wanted a living thing, something that would keep growing long after she was gone. Something settled in Sarah's chest, some last piece of anxiety or self-doubt finally letting go. She'd spent 9 months trying to prove she deserved Maggie's trust, trying to show she was worthy of the fortune and the responsibility. But maybe that was the wrong goal. Maybe the point wasn't to prove anything. Maybe the point was simply to keep building, keep growing, keep helping, and trust that the work itself was enough. Evening came slowly. The crowd dispersed in waves. The foundation staff left in their chartered bus. The success stories from the residential program departed in groups, still supporting each other, still connected. Robert Hayes shook Sarah's hand and reminded her they had a board meeting next Tuesday. Frank and Martha Wilson climbed into their old truck and drove away with waves and promises to visit soon. Sarah sent Emma home with Rosa, the housekeeper who'd become part of their small family. She wanted a few more minutes alone in this place where everything had changed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson and deep purple. The tower's turbines turned slowly against the darkening sky, generating power, doing exactly what they'd been designed to do. Sarah walked inside through the museum room and found the stairs that led down to the original chamber. It was empty now of treasure, but full of memory. The metal cabinet stood open and empty. The wooden crates were gone. But the words Maggie had carved into the wall remained. Foundation built on patience. Walls raised with wisdom. Fortune secured through faith. Sarah traced the letters with her fingers, feeling the grooves her grandmother had painstakingly etched into stone. She thought about patience, those decades of careful investing, never rushing, never panicking, just consistently making good decisions and letting time do its work. She thought about wisdom, knowing when to hold on and when to let go, when to save and when to spend, when to stay silent and when to speak. She thought about faith, believing in a future you wouldn't live to see, trusting that your work would matter even after you were gone. I understand now. Sarah whispered to the empty chamber, to her grandmother's spirit, to whatever force in the universe had orchestrated this entire improbable journey. It was never about the money, always about what the money made possible. You didn't give me $287 million, Grandma. You gave me the tools to build something meaningful. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for seeing something in me I didn't see in myself. Thank you for teaching me that wealth isn't what you have. It's what you do with what you have. She climbed back up the stairs and stood in the tower one final time. The last light was fading from the sky. She pulled out her phone and called Emma. "Mama, are you coming home soon?" Emma's voice carried that particular tone children used when they were trying not to sound worried, but definitely were. "Soon, baby. Wanted to ask you something first. Do you remember Great-Grandma Maggie?" "A little bit. She smelled like cookies, and she let me feed her chickens." Sarah smiled. "She was more than that, Emma. She was one of the strongest, smartest, most remarkable women I've ever known. She built something amazing that's going to help a lot of people. Someday when you're older, I'm going to tell you the whole story, but for now, I just want you to know something important." "What, Mama? You come from a line of strong women. Your great-grandmother, me, and you. We're builders, Emma. We take what we're given, even if it's not much, even if it looks like nothing, and we build something meaningful with it. Like I built the foundation, exactly like that. And someday you'll build something too, something that reflects who you are and what you believe in. You don't have to know what it is yet. Just know that you can, that you have everything you need inside you already. Great-Grandma Maggie taught me that. Now I'm teaching you." "Okay, Mama," Emma's voice brightened. "I love you. I love you too, baby. I'll be home in 20 minutes. Sarah hung up and took one last look at the tower. this monument to patience and wisdom and faith, this structure that had seemed worthless but held everything, this fortress that had protected not just wealth but vision, the belief that one person making good choices over a lifetime could create ripples that touched thousands of other lives. She walked to her car, not the old Civic with its check engine light, but a reliable Honda CR-V that started every time and had working heat and didn't make alarming noises on the highway. She drove toward Denver as the last light disappeared from the sky, the towers shrinking in her rearview mirror but never quite disappearing. The road stretched ahead, dark but navigable, unknown but not frightening, just like the future had been a year ago when she'd opened that trapdoor and descended into darkness. Just like every choice that mattered. Just like the journey from struggling single mother to guardian of a fortune to builder of something that would outlast them all. Sarah thought about Maggie's words carved in stone. Foundation built on patience. She'd been patient this year. Learning instead of rushing. Building systems that would last instead of making dramatic gestures that would fade. Understanding that sustainable change took time and persistence, and the willingness to keep showing up even when results weren't immediately visible. Walls raised with wisdom. She'd sought wisdom from experts, from the women in her program, from her own mistakes. She'd learned that you couldn't fix poverty by throwing money at it, that people needed infrastructure and community and belief in their own capability, that the best help was the kind that made itself unnecessary, that built people up until they could stand on their own. Fortune secured through faith. Not faith in religious sense necessarily, though some people found that helpful, but faith that doing the right thing consistently would eventually lead to right outcomes. Faith that investing in people wasn't charity, but investment in the most literal sense. That given resources and time, humans were remarkably resilient and capable. Faith that what you built could outlast you if you built it right. The city lights of Denver appeared on the horizon, and Sarah thought about tomorrow. Board meeting in the morning. 3 new women arriving at the residential program in the afternoon. Site visit to the expansion project in Colorado Springs. Dinner with Emma and homework help. The ordinary work of building something extraordinary. She'd inherited $287 million, but what she'd really inherited was Maggie's lesson. That true wealth measured not by what you accumulated, but by what you built, what you shared, what you left behind for those who came after. That the greatest fortunes weren't counted in dollars, but in lives touched, in futures changed, in possibilities created where none had existed before. Sarah drove through the Colorado night toward home, toward Emma, toward the foundation, toward all the work still to be done and all the lives still to be changed. Behind her, the tower stood on its hillside, turbines turning in darkness, generating power from invisible wind, converting potential into reality. A monument to everything Maggie had been, a blueprint for everything Sarah was becoming, a promise to Emma about everything she might one day build. The road led forward into uncertainty and possibility, just like it always had, just like it always would. And Sarah drove into it with her hands steady on the wheel and her heart full of purpose, ready for whatever came next, ready to keep building, ready to honor the fortune she'd been given, not by hoarding it, but by using it to create more fortunes, not of money, but of opportunity, of choice, of hope, for every person who walked through the foundation's doors looking for a second chance. Because that, in the end, was what Maggie had truly left her. Not wealth, but wisdom. Not money, but meaning. Not an ending, but a beginning that would continue long after Sarah herself was gone. A legacy measured not in dollars, but in lives transformed, in cycles broken, in futures rebuilt, in towers that looked like ruins but held everything, in fortunes secured not through greed, but through faith in what humans could become when someone believed in them enough to give them the tools they needed to believe in themselves. Sarah pulled into her driveway. The porch light was on. Emma's face appeared in the window, watching for her, home, family, purpose. The things that mattered most, purchased not with a fortune, but made possible by it, made sustainable by it, made permanent by the foundation that would continue this work long after Sarah was gone. She got out of the car and walked toward that light, toward her daughter, toward everything they would build together. The night was dark, but the path was clear. And somewhere in Colorado Springs, a tower stood turning in the wind, generating power, proving that even the most worthless-seeming things could become the most valuable if you were patient enough to see their potential and wise enough to honor what they could become.